Madam President.
Senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I come to the floor today to talk about American energy. Joe Biden is the president of high prices and of low approval ratings. Just yesterday, a gallon of gas sold for the highest price ever in the United States, and inflation is at a 40-year high. Now, the American people clearly understand that radical Democrat energy policies, they're the cause of these high prices, the prices that people are paying every time they go to the pump to fill up. Now, on Thursday, the White House admitted that in terms of these high prices, they admitted it's going to get worse. Now, of course, Democrats are trying to blame Vladimir Putin for the high price at the pump. Well, to me, it is dishonest and it is desperate. Vladimir Putin didn't cause the inflation crisis that began in this country 12 months ago. Now, Vladimir Putin has cashed in on America's inflation crisis. He's done it by selling more energy at high prices, and he's done it for more than a year. It has been his cash cow. America's inflation crisis is specifically the result of Democrat spending and Democrat attacks on American energy. The two combined have added to the situation that we're in now, attacking American energy and massive spending. Last March, Joe Biden signed the single most expensive spending bill in American history. Even his own experts warned him not to do it. Democrat economist expert Larry Summers, who had been Treasury Secretary for President Clinton, he warned that this is going to cause inflation. Last February, the former Obama and Clinton advisor wrote in the Washington Post, quote, this is from Larry Summers, "There is a chance that stimulus on a scale closer to World War II levels will set off inflationary pressures." He said, inflationary pressures of a kind that we have not seen in a generation. He was exactly right. That's what's happened. That's why we're at a 40-year high of inflation, and that's a generation. Obama advisor Jason Furman said the same thing. He said that bill was, quote, definitely too big. He said, I don't know any economist, he said, who are recommending something the size of what President Biden was doing. Yet, Joe Biden proved to be hard of hearing, refused to listen to what they had to say, signed the bill anyway, put $2 trillion on our nation's credit card, and he flooded the country with government cash. Ever since then, this country has been in an inflation upward spiral. At the same time, Joe Biden has also had a stranglehold over American energy supply. He announced it during the campaign and enforced it the day he took office. Now, Madam President, energy is called the master resource for a reason. Powers our economy, powers our military, powers our nation. It's critically important. When the price of energy goes up, so does the price of everything else. Well, starting on his first day in office, Joe Biden has waged an all-out war on American energy. He shut down the Keystone XL pipeline, and he bragged about it. No hiding from this one. He shut down oil and gas leases on federal lands. He bragged about that as well. He shut down exploration for energy in the Arctic. It was always interesting to see the senior senator from Alaska, Senator Murkowski, come to the floor and say over the last year that we're using more energy from Vladimir Putin's Russia than we are from Alaska, her home state, in terms of oil. Those are because of Joe Biden's policies. Now his lackeys at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission are making it almost impossible to build gas pipelines, to move gas from where it's explored to where it's needed. As a result, we are today actually producing a lot less energy than we were prior to the pandemic. I heard the White House spokesperson, she talked about the fact that we're at record high. We're not. We're at about 1.3 million barrels of oil a day, fewer now being produced in the United States than we were prior to the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, we were number one in production in the world. Now we're number 3 behind Saudi Arabia and behind Russia. What does lower supply of American energy mean? Well, supply and demand. Lower supply means higher prices. When Joe Biden took office, a gallon of gas was at $2.38. It went up every month. 12 of the last 13 months, the price of gas kept going up at the pump. 12 of the 13 months Joe Biden has been in the White House, the price of gas went up. Meanwhile, Vladimir Putin was laughing all the way to the bank. Joe Biden must be patting himself on the back right now about banning Russian oil, something it took him kicking and screaming to do after bipartisan members in the House and the Senate came together and said, "You got to stop doing this." It took him a couple of extra weeks to come to the realization that this body in the House, in a bipartisan way, were opposed to the delays, the ongoing delays of this administration. Now Joe Biden has his latest excuse for inflation. He says it's Vladimir Putin. American people aren't buying it. In record numbers, they're not buying what the president is trying to sell. The American people haven't forgotten the past year. It's been a year of high prices. It's been a year of misery and pain for families all across the country. For Joe Biden, it's been a year of excuses. The excuses keep changing, but they are ongoing. First, he said inflation was transitory. He said it month after month after month after month. And then remember when he said inflation was a good thing? Then, of course, he blamed corporate greed. Always looking for somebody else to blame, always trying to pass the buck. Now he says inflation, which has been crushing American families. He said it was because of Vladimir Putin just 3 weeks ago. Mr. President, people have been suffering under inflation and their wages haven't been keeping up with the rising prices in this country for well over a year since you took office. People recognize that. They remember the pain and the suffering and trying to go through Christmas, whether they could decide to afford gifts for the family. Families that had to decide, living on a fixed income, if they could afford to eat or to heat their homes. That was all before Putin, and they haven't forgotten, Mr. President, even though you may not think they remember. They do. Well, it's now 8 months until our election, and I know we're going to hear a lot more excuses from the Democrats in Washington between now and November 8th. And I expect the excuses are going to change a couple of more times. None of the excuses are going to be believable, so they'll keep trying to come up with another one. Inflation sure wasn't transitory, not for a full year, not to a point where we're now at the 40-year high for inflation. How about that idea when the president said inflation was a good thing? Actually, we heard it from the White House press secretary. We heard it from the White House chief of staff. And they said inflation is a sign of high demand. If our economy is doing so well, why don't the American people believe it? What kind of fantasy land is the president living in? According to the Washington Post, Joe Biden's approval rating on the economy, how well he's doing in the economy, is out of 100 points, he's at 37% approval. These are record low numbers. Now, so Democrats can use their arguments all that they want. I think it just makes Americans want to reject anything the Democrats are trying to sell. Democrats are right about corporate greed, then why have Democrats done nothing about it? They've run Washington for the past full year, plus a couple of months. Democrats have had the time to introduce plenty of bills, bills to raise taxes, bills to take over elections, bills to pack the Supreme Court from 9 up to 13 members, bills to make Washington, D.C. a state. What can they point to as an accomplishment to actually address and lower inflation? That's what the American people want. Just this past weekend, the studies are out. What's the number one concern of the American people? It's inflation. What are the Democrats doing about it? Nothing. They're making it worse. So we're living in this world where the Democrats in the White House continue to spin one story after another, and Democrat spokesmen for the party continue to try to convince the American people. Don't believe your own two eyes, believe them. The American people are smarter than that. So Russia invaded Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. It's about a year after the inflation crisis began. It is a great human tragedy and is heartbreaking. Tomorrow, members of this body will be having a video address by President Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, a heroic and courageous individual who is leading his nation with stubborn courage, historic patriotism, fighting for freedom. To try to tie this to the inflation that the American people have been suffering through for the last year is just wrong. 2021 was the worst inflation in 40 years, long before Putin invaded Ukraine. By the time Putin invaded Ukraine, gas prices were up in the United States more than $1 a gallon, and America was more addicted to Russian oil, because that's what Joe Biden wanted. He wanted us to need more Russian oil. But that didn't stop Joe Biden from trying to blame the whole thing on Putin. So former Obama advisor Steve Ratner put it this way: this is Joe Biden's inflation, and he needs to own it. Over the weekend, Larry Summers said this. He said the president was wrong. He's talking about Joe Biden. He said the president was wrong to blame this month's inflation number on the war in Ukraine. Larry Summers went on to say everyone had been expecting from the time before Putin launched the invasion that inflation was going to accelerate. He went on to say this is a consequence fundamentally of an overheated economy. He said we're not going to have a full final solution until we do something about the overheated economy. A full year has passed, 1 year in office, 40-year high of inflation, and a year full of excuses by a president whose excuses do not add up. What adds up is the fundamental fact that American families spent $1,000 more on energy during Joe Biden's first year as president than they did the previous year. And it's going to be worse this year. The time for excuses is over. There is no excuse for restricting American energy production. Democrat senators spent 10 months denying that there even was inflation and doing nothing about it. Yet now some Democrats in this body are talking about making it even worse. They've introduced multiple bills to raise taxes. Astonishingly, one of the bills they've introduced is to raise taxes on American energy. They already tried that last year with their reckless tax and spending spree. Now it seems like some of them want to do it again. Well, if you put more taxes on American energy, what's that going to do? It's going to raise the price even higher. Higher costs on producers are going to become higher costs on the customers. People don't want us to raise costs. They want us to reduce costs. That's what they're complaining about. That's what we've gotten as a result of the Biden policies. We need to break this chokehold that the Democrats and the Biden administration have on American energy. So how do we do that? Well, 2 weeks ago, I led a letter with every Republican on the Senate Energy Committee, and we sent it to President Biden the morning after the State of the Union address. We gave him a list of 10 specific actions that he could take today to produce more American energy and bring down the cost for American families. Step one would be to end his executive order on oil and gas leases on federal lands. Half of my home state of Wyoming is federal lands. There's an abundance of energy there. The American people need it. It will help reduce costs for families. It will actually bring tax revenue into the government, both the state as well as the federal government. But yet, Joe Biden's not interested. Joe Biden's executive order has no basis in science, no basis in law. It needs to be rescinded today. fact that some people have leases to explore for energy, a small number, is no excuse for the president's actions. Over 4,000 leases are waiting permission to drill right now. They have a lease, but they're tied up in red tape and cannot get permission to drill from the government. So even if you have a lease, you need to then get permission from the government to use the lease. They ought to approve those leases today. But we need to go further. We need a long-term commitment from the government of the United States to produce American energy to help American families. Leases take years to explore and to develop. You need a commitment that's going to last long term. No one's going to make those kinds of investments if they think Joe Biden is going to shut them down again the next day. Now, American energy companies have a lot of good reasons not to trust Joe Biden, not to trust those who he has, the anointed ones who he has appointed to high positions in the government. If you just take a look at Joe Biden's nominees, they're a murderer's row of climate elitists and climate alarmists. And those are the ones that call the tune for this president. If you take a look, if you took a year of Joe Biden's energy policies and take a look at what's happened over the past year that got us here today, and you explain that to the American public and you say, what do you think about this as they're filling up their tank? Two-thirds of them would say, under these Biden policies, two-thirds would say the country's heading in the wrong direction. That may be every Republican. It's also a lot of independents, and it's also some Democrats as well who have buyer's remorse at what they've gotten from this president. It's going to take time to repair the damage. We need to start today. The time for excuses and blame from this administration needs to be over. The American public is demanding American energy, and we need it now. Thank you, Madam President. I yield the floor. Suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk, call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.